Today, I'm over in Rancho Palo Verde, and I don't know if I'm saying that correctly, but it is about 30-40 minutes south of where I'm staying in Manhattan Beach. And I appreciate everybody that's been sending over all the suggestions of places to check out, you know, and the requests to like meet up and do things. It's been awesome. Just keep in mind, I'm only one guy, so I might not be able to get to you guys and get to all the requests or actually see everybody in person that's been reaching out. But I do appreciate it because I feel very welcome here. Just like when I went to Brazil, you visited somewhere new, and it's nice to feel welcome when you're visiting places. So one thing I wanted to cover today, and thanks Anthony for sending me this story, and you kind of just asked me in an email what I think about this, but I'm going to address it in an entire video today. And basically what it is why the entire economy hasn't completely gone off the rails yet. And there's probably a lot of different reasons for this, but the story that Anthony sent me covers the fact that, you know, we had all this COVID stimulus money that obviously changed our economy big time and changed where we're at right now financially and why some people still have money. But besides that, there's another big thing that's different this time around that didn't exist during the last great financial crisis. So, and what that is Americans' exposure and vulnerability to fluctuating interest rates, okay? And I thought this was very interesting. Never heard of it from this point of view before, so I wanted to talk about this and give my take on it. At the end of 2007, U.S. household debt as a percentage of U.S. gross domestic product has fallen from 101% to 77%, flash forward to today. The interesting thing about that is this decrease in debt actually occurred at a time when we had very low interest rates ever since the last great financial crisis. For the most part, interest rates have been very low during this time frame. One theory on why this is true and why people decided not to carry as much debt is, number one, they didn't have a choice. I mean, a lot of the mortgage products that got people in trouble were taken off the market. There was the Dodd-Frank laws that came into play that prevented some of that as well. But the interesting thing about this is even though during this time frame, the amount of debt that households are carrying kind of went down, it's starting to creep back up. That's one thing that everybody needs to realize right now, because the fact of the matter is credit card debt is about to reach a record high at $1 trillion in credit card debt. We have HELOC loans, people getting these HELOC loans, that's going up to a rate that we haven't seen since the last great financial crisis. The reality is it takes people time to default on these loans. It takes time for all of this to come to fruition. Even though households might not be carrying as much debt overall today as they were during the great financial crisis, we are on our way back up the hill, so to speak. And I'll be on my way back up the hill in just a minute. And this story is also saying that over the past 15 years, the amount of household income that is needed to service people's debt has fallen from 13.2% of disposable income back in 2007, fast forward to today, to 9.6% in 2023. So essentially what this is saying is people are not as burdened by their debt payments today as they were back in 2007. Now, do you think that's true? Is this true in your own life? I mean, are you old enough to have gone through the last great financial crisis? And do you feel more hardship now or back then? That's something I want you guys to let me know. Because for me, it's hard to say because I was just getting started in life back then. Like, during the last great financial crisis, I had just moved to Miami. I was only 20 years old and I was working dead-end jobs. I didn't really have anything in life, but I made it happen for myself, and even during that time, even during that recession, I was still able to get up on my feet, so to speak, and leave Illinois and move to Florida on my own. And paying off debt wasn't really a concern for me back then. And even though the Fed has raised their interest rates by 5 percentage points over the past year and a half, the actual household debt servicing costs have only risen by 1.5 percentage points compared to disposable income. This house is listed for $2.25 million and it does have one beautiful view, but remember this listing later on in this video when I make some points because it totally applies here. Now this house would cost you $15,000 per month if you were to buy this house at this price and these interest rates, but they rented this house for only $5,900 just a year ago, okay? March of 2022, someone rented this house for $5,900. So the cost to rent this house is literally 1/3 of what it would cost to buy it. So what is the incentive for someone to own it? Well, let's take a look. When the current owner sells this house, they're going to make a nice chunk of change because it looks like they've probably owned it for a while because their property tax bill is pretty low. If we look at their 2022 property tax bill, it was only $7,600 a year for 2022, which is very low for a house that's worth $2.25 million. So the owner of this house, whenever they sell it, they're going to have to buy another house somewhere, right? Now, if they move to Texas or somewhere cheap, they're going to be able to buy a house for cash, no problem, and have plenty of money left over. But if they want to stay in California and buy another house of this same price or more, they're going to be paying far more as far as their monthly payment. As you can see, they're going to be paying far more in property taxes, insurance, everything. And this is what I think might actually put the consumer under, which I'll discuss later in this video. And the theory here is because people today don't have as many adjustable rate loans and adjustable rate credit products, these interest rate hikes that the Fed has been performing is not affecting people's household budgets as much as it was thought that it was going to. Now, I don't know if that's true or not. That's why I asked you guys to speak up on this. But the part that I find fascinating about all of this is this might mean that people actually still have further to climb. People can still absorb more payments and more debt and more unexpected costs right now than even I would think would be the case. This could be one of the main reasons why we haven't entered a big recession and why we haven't seen a downfall of everything quite yet, because people do still have the spending power and the American economy is proving to be more resilient than we thought, which on the surface is a good thing, but at the same time it's not, because all it means is that there's going to be more pain when things do come down, because everybody's thinking that nothing is going to happen. And you know, when you have this mentality that it can't happen to me sort of thing, that's when people get in trouble. Apparently the biggest sector of the economy that has been going deeper and deeper into debt is the US government. Surprise, surprise. In fact, US government debt has literally doubled since the last great financial crisis, because in 2007, it was 64% of GDP, and flash forward to 2022, it's 120%. And I know we're in 2023, but those are the latest stats that they give us here. And they also go on to say in this story that probably most likely the government, including Congress, won't be doing much from here until 2024 in way of making any type of radical legislation or new laws or anything along those lines, because we're getting too close to the election cycle, and that's not something that they like to do prior to an election, because they just want to try and get reelected. That's always the point, right? And this is not a conspiracy theory. This is something that happens every single election cycle, and it's normal. It doesn't matter which side of the aisle you're on or the people you vote for are on, they do it. And so what I'm thinking is the interest rates haven't really gone high enough to really affect people's spending like the Fed thought that it would, right? What they probably need to do is to continue their interest rate hikes, which likely will have an impact at some point. And let's not forget that all of the interest rate hikes that they have done so far are not going to be felt in the economy until a year later or so, maybe even 18 months later. So we're only feeling the interest rate hikes right now that were done a year ago. And even if consumers are not feeling the squeeze from interest rates yet, we know that businesses are, because many businesses have reported a huge decrease in the amount of available credit now that we've had the bank failures and the interest rates have caused that. If interest rates go even higher, we're likely to see even more bank failures, even further credit tightening. And when businesses don't have access to credit, what do? The first thing they do, start looking at ways to cut expenses. If cutting expenses doesn't work and that's not enough, next thing is going to be layoffs, getting rid of people, okay? If that doesn't work, it's still not enough. The next thing is business downsizing, you know, closing locations and closing branches. Businesses have a lot of levers to pull in order to try and get out of this situation. And unfortunately, none of them are good for people who work at these businesses. And that's something I think that they're overlooking here when it comes to these interest rate hikes. Ultimately, the more businesses perform layoffs and the more of them close branches and the more of them that cut back on expenses, ultimately it means higher unemployment, and it also means those businesses are spending less money in the economy, as well as the people who recently lost a job. So it has like a double whammy effect. And my other thought on this is, okay, if consumers are not quite as vulnerable to higher interest rates during this downturn compared to the last one, that might be true, but what about other expenses, guys? And let's just focus on real estate here for a second. Forget about everything else. The fact that gas costs a crazy amount of money, as well as food and utilities and all of this. But let's look at housing related expenses, okay? Rent costs a fortune, buying a house costs a fortune, and just maintaining a house costs a fortune. People who bought over the past couple of years at all-time high prices are now getting hit with all-time high property tax bills. They're getting hit with all-time high property insurance bills. The cost to repair their home and the labor costs, if you need to hire somebody to help with repair costs for the home, have never been higher. And on top of all of that, people still want to have a good time. People still want to live their life, take vacations, you know, take their families out to dinner sometimes, and all of that is potential debt that gets racked up. And we're seeing that now with the amount of credit card debt that people have, as well as the amount of HELOC loans that have gone up over the past few years. So people are borrowing money, and we are getting closer back to that debt bubble that we had during the last great financial crisis. But what my point is here with all of this is maybe this time around, raising the interest rates won't be the catalyst for people to lose their spending power, but it will be the rising cost of everything, essentially inflation. Because when you have these higher property tax bills, when you have a higher insurance bill, it leaves you less money to spend in the economy, in the real world. So what do you do then? And I think really my message with all of this is just to be cautious. This is not a time to think that, oh, we're gonna totally dodge this recession and everything is gonna be great, because that's pretty naive thinking. And a lot of the economic indicators that we look at are not showing that. So my question then becomes, maybe it's not going to be rising interest rates that starts putting people under and starts with the increases of foreclosures and people not being able to pay the bills. Maybe it's just higher costs of everything that's going to cause it, rather than the higher interest rates. And the higher interest rates do play a role in that as well. Anthony, you want to know what I think about this? That's what I think. I think that these higher interest rates are going to play a role, and they just haven't been felt yet. And, you know, news outlets like to write stories that make everything look great because that's what they get paid to do, okay? No one is paying me to say anything specific here on YouTube. I mean, I say what I feel like, and I cover stories that I think are interesting, and that's pretty much the extent of it. But no one is specifically paying me and saying, hey, Michael, you can cover this, this, and that, but stay away from that, this, and that. So I just cover what I feel like and what I think you guys are going to be able to relate to and get something out of, rather than just try to sugarcoat everything and make it seem like nothing bad's ever going to happen. And this kind of leads me right into my next story, and that is that so many people in the younger generation are saying that they're willing to do just about anything right now, anywhere from downsizing to buying a fixer-upper, just to be able to buy an affordable house, which is kind of sad and also promising at the same time, right? Like, you see that the younger generation still hasn't given up. They still have hope that they'll be able to own a slice of the American dream one day, right? But on the flip side, their desperation could possibly cause them to make some pretty poor decisions right about now, especially being desperate to get in and buy during this housing market. And when you look at the fact that so many of these younger kids are willing to make big sacrifices to be able to get into a home, those big sacrifices could potentially come with some negative consequences. Buying a fixer-upper can be great, but how much of that work can you do yourself? I just covered the fact that, you know, hiring out labor right now is more expensive than ever, and so are the actual materials than before, right? So buying a fixer-upper can cost a fortune, especially if you don't even know everything that's wrong with the house. So that's number one. They're saying they'll do things like take on roommates. Well, that's not such a bad situation, except if you rent to your friends, then you'd be like, well, you know, I'm kind of late on the rent this week, and a week turns into 2, and 2 weeks turns into a month, and it's hard to get into fights and, you know, collect rent from friends. So as long as you're responsible about it, and you do like a house hacking situation and rent to people who are like verified tenants that you know you can count on and pay the rent, that might not be such a bad idea. But as far as renting to friends and hoping it's all going to work out, could be a bad idea. And 27% of these younger kids are saying they're even willing to move away from family or friends in order to buy a home. And I actually agree with that one the most, not because I'm against people living near their family and friends, but because it gets people out of their comfort zone, right? It gets people looking outside of the area they're familiar with. And I've told you guys this 100 times on the channel, like, listen, if you're looking in an area that you feel like you can't afford, look somewhere else. There's plenty of places out there that offer affordable housing still, but it's just a matter of whether or not you can get a good job there, and are you willing to live there is more the question, not really whether it exists or not. And this is totally related to the last story, and I'll tell you why. Because another point that this story mentions is how the higher interest rates haven't really had the desired effect on the housing market yet. And I would agree with that. We did see demand fall apart starting last summer, okay? And it has since resurged a little bit, but not to a really strong point. So I do think it is having an effect, but probably not the desired effect quite yet that the Fed is looking for. So what we mean by the interest rate hikes not having the desired effect that the Fed wants so far is the fact that sales are down, okay? Sales are down 20% according to the National Association of Realtors from 1 year ago. So sales are down, but home prices are not down nearly as much, only 2.4% according to the National Association of Realtors. Why is that? You know, if the demand is not there, why is that happening? Well, it's because of what I've told you guys before. It's all because of low inventory, okay? Low inventory is fueling this entire issue right now. So what we're seeing is that the interest rate hikes have affected the demand side of things in terms of, you know, there's far fewer buyers out there in the market than before. But it definitely hasn't helped create more inventory and have sellers put homes on the market. So the problem is these high interest rates have not only affected buyers, but it's also affected sellers, right? Because you have buyers that saying, I can't afford it at these prices / rates. And you have sellers kind of saying the same thing. You know, even though they could turn around and sell that house for a nice profit, where are they gonna go? What are they gonna buy next? Can they even afford it? I'll bet you half of the people who live in these houses that we're walking past right now probably couldn't afford to buy this house all over again today at whatever the house value is appraised at right now, combined with today's interest rates. Probably not, guys. There is a such thing as generational wealth. There is such thing as, you know, how much time you've been in the real estate market that ultimately affects how much wealth you've been able to accumulate over the years. And these young kids that want to buy properties don't have that. And my whole point is, like, everybody who owns all these houses here can't trade and buy and sell these houses forever, right? Eventually, people need to sell or want to sell in order to cash out, or they just die, right? They're just gone, and someone else will get the house. But the timing is awful because you have a huge generation of buyers right now, like millennials and Gen Zers, that want to get into homes, but they're totally priced out because of this current situation. And right now it feels like there's a shortage of inventory, but in probably 20 years from now, it's gonna be the complete opposite situation where we have millions and millions of homes listed for sale because there's nobody there to buy them. But if you are a younger person and you're having a hard time with buying a home right now, you gotta think about some of these things before you do pull the trigger, even if you feel ready. Like, for example, you know, a lot of people are willing to just go, all right, I'll relocate for a job, I can work remotely or this and that. but that hasn't worked out so well for so many people. And the amount of remote work jobs that are available are starting to dwindle. Unemployment that's projected to go up to 4.5% in a year from now, July of 2024, which maybe will be even higher, who knows. And on top of that, a lot of people who get these remote work jobs end up getting called back into the office at some point, and they get in trouble with that. And now they bought a house that's 500 miles away or whatever, and now they're like, oh, what do I do? Maybe not everybody even relocates for a remote work job, but just a regular job in general. And you have to be careful with that too, because it's fine to relocate for a job, but to just jump in and buy a house somewhere when you're gonna do that can be very risky, because you don't really know the area, right? You might have that job, but what if you lose that job? Can you get a different one? How strong is that local economy? That's something that people should definitely be researching before they jump into stuff like that. And we're being fed all these lies about how strong the job market is, you know, month after month when the jobs numbers come out. But then once the revisions come out and they actually revise down the amount of jobs that were actually created, it's far lower than what the labor stats are saying. That's something that anybody needs to be paying attention to right now who might be considering moving to a new place for a job, especially if you're thinking about buying in that area. And like I said earlier, I'm all for people picking up and moving to new areas in order to find an affordable house if you really want to become a homeowner. But I would definitely advise you to make sure you've spent some time in that area before you just jump in and buy a home there because it's affordable. You might not like the neighborhood. You might not have the type of work and business opportunities you were hoping for. Maybe you don't jive with the people there. Who knows? Maybe there's not enough amenities nearby. There can be all sorts of things that can be something that might be an afterthought for people, right? They don't think about that until it's too late. And that's something that I'm trying to prevent people from doing right now. And the other thing I would tell people is this, like, why do you want to own a home to begin with? Is it because it's just the thing to do? Like, people grow up, they graduate from college, they get married, they have a couple kids, buy a house and all that? Is it just because of the pressure from society? Is it because you want to be a real estate investor and own multiple properties? Is it because you think owning a house is better than renting? Like, I don't know what your mentality is with that, but I would definitely be taking a long, hard look at your reasonings for buying right now. And I've talked to some of you guys on the phone, done some consulting calls with people, and tried to help people through their individual situations. And just from doing that, and also all the years that I was working as a real estate agent with people, you know, literally everyone's situation is different, guys. Like, someone's motivations to become a homeowner can be totally different than the next person looking to buy in the same neighborhood. You know, their motivations and reasonings for doing so can be completely not even on the same page. I just wouldn't be doing anything out of desperation right now because you feel like you'll never be able to own a house. I'd be acting more responsible than that and really looking at, can I afford the house? How stable is my job? Am I going to keep this property for a long period of time? Do I like this neighborhood? Do I even want to live here? Or am I just doing all of this because I have the fear of missing out? And don't forget to check the cost difference between renting and owning in the area you're considering, because that can be another huge factor that can really help you decide what you should be doing right now. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to the channel. And if you don't want to wait for my next video to come out, please check out this video right over here, and I'll see you in the next one.